Hello, everyone. My name is Baylen and this is Abby Martin. And with us today, we have Shannon Ross, founder and director of the community. I'd like to get into this conversation today, but real quick, Shannon, let's hear who you are, what you do, just a brief little introduction.
Yeah. No, thank you for having me. I
Yeah,
am, I guess the official title is founder and executive director of the community, which is literally the hat that I'm wearing right now. But in addition to that, I find myself just in a couple of spaces in the justice work. I'm a consultant with Marquette University for the Higher Education and Prison Program, the EPP program, building a consortium of different schools, and I'm also working at creating a model with some other folks across the country around peer support for higher education in and post prison. Then I have for-profit hat doing peer support work, youth prevention, some community development projects locally in the city around reentry housing, and a collective of nonprofit and for-profit work organizations working together, and then just I guess some fellowships in other areas. And so it's a kind of variety of things I get pulled into with this space around preventing people from going in for the first time ever or going back in if they were inside prison.
that's awesome. Sounds like you're doing some excellent work, a lot of great work for, like you said, preventing reentry and preventing entry in the first place. You know, that leads us to, you know, language. I feel like uh, there's a systemic barrier. There's a societal, disconnect, and a lot of people are just misinformed about the topic of language and how we speak to one another, how we address one another, labels and names and communication impacts how we think of ourselves, how we look at others. Um, so let me ask you, how do labels positively and negatively affect people?
Well, they negatively affect people. Kind of, I guess I'll start there. I don't know why I chose that one of the two options, but they negatively affect people because every time you speak about yourself, whether anyone, I was just kind of actually thinking about this morning in preparation for a conversation later today. But the way we speak about other people and the way we speak about ourselves when we're just alone, and not even anyone else is around, like it's all staying in our head, it creates this neural groove in the brain that then becomes what that thought travels down every time it happens, right? So, for example, like negative reinforcement. If you are somewhere, this picture we use in our presentation that I think is kind of funny. It's a comic strip, and it's a person who got like the wrong order, and then there's like this person next to them saying the barista did that on purpose. And so the more you say things like that, the more you start to believe that things are like purposely happening to impact your life in a negative way, or people don't like you, or like you just have bad luck. Whatever the story is you're telling yourself, then every time you encounter struggling situations, you're going to revert to that neural groove in your brain because that's when it exists, right? The same way that when you go down a bike path in an unkempt forest, you're going to take the same one that the people before you took, right? You're not going to create your own because it's easier to take the one that already has, some flatness to it. And so, when we do that, we have to be incredibly disciplined in the way we talk about life to ourselves more than anything else, because that's where the foundation of where you go in your life is going to be. And people smell it. They smell confidence. They smell conspiracy theory. They smell, like balance and stability in thought in the way you speak. You may not realize it, but it's very apparent to most people. It's the same with fear in animals, right? They can tell if you really are, able to kind of manage the situation. And so when you start to just not be able to have these positive thoughts or have these like maybe balancing benefit of the doubt type of thoughts in your mind just by yourself, you create negative ones, and the neural grooves become the way you live your life all the time. The same then process happens for positive. The more you have positive thoughts, the easier it is as a habit, as a mental muscle to then challenge the negative thought that's always there. We all have it. Like it's not a matter of like this is how you create yourself to be a loving non-hippie. Like you're always gonna have negative thoughts. It's never gonna stop. But it's a matter of like creating a mental muscle where you can more quickly grab yourself out of that process and say, okay, I'm not going to even think about this anymore because I'm not in a position where I can even make a decision, right? Or I can look at this in a positive light. I'm just going to hold off on it. Or you can pull yourself fully out of the negative thought and say, nope, nope, like we're going to come over here. the analogy that I would use a lot of times when we had this coping skills program that me and a friend of mine inside co-facilitated and co-designed for 2 years, which is now a program that exists at different prisons across the state. It was basically life is a, and I say this also at the beginning of a video that we have called Two Wolves, and it's life is a picture with two sides. Like what could be better, what could be worse. And at any given moment, you're choosing which of those two you're looking at. Both equally true, right? It's not a matter of like I live in reality. They're both true. But it's a matter
Yeah.
of you're looking at which one is going to potentially, more likely, almost guaranteed, have you make you feel gratitude, make you feel more confident, make you feel more, I guess, at peace about life because you're looking at how things could be worse, right? Because if I'm looking at my life and I'm saying, yeah, things could be better, but actually, in any given situation, the mass majority of the time, things could be way worse, right? And you could look at history, you could look across the
Hmm.
world, and there are people that are struggling
Yeah.
way more than any of us. And I was very conscious of that when I was in prison. That is something that kind of really helped me out. I had a cellie who he had his stories on his part of the room that were all about like how bad things are in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And it just reminded him every day of like, even though this sucks that we're in, like significantly, it could be way different. And so just having that mentality for me has always been just really empowering, really, I think, balancing and level setting, right? Because free people problems, I'll say that commonly. I'll say I'm not standing for count at the end of the day. Like, all of this is fine. Let it all burn. Like, I have the one thing I wanted for 17 years. I don't want to lose sight of that. But if I look at how things could be better, I'm never happy. Never, 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 ever happy because I can always be better. There's always somebody else that has a bigger plane. The J. Cole song, Love Yours. It's exactly that. So, yeah, it's just kind of, to me, that's how it all comes down to with language and storytelling is the way we use language for ourselves is more important because everything else will come off of that. And if you're not using language with yourself, people are going to be able to see very quickly in a conversation with you that you are someone who lies to yourself, someone who doesn't have like individual stability in your mind when no one else is around, and you're someone else that it's kind of hard to trust if you're going to reasonably manage what's going on in front of you at any given moment.
Hmm. Yeah, it's that consistency. I feel like building up that momentum, that consistency, and rebuilding those pathways, like you were saying. Um, so specifically, when you're talking to yourself, for example, or when I'm talking to myself as someone formerly incarcerated, how would you how would you recommend someone go about rebuilding those positive pathways? Like what words or what phrases should we try and incorporate to address ourselves and others?
Yeah. There's two topics there that I think of. One is the general human aspect of it, like I am valuable. I can. It's a very cliche slogan or term. I think I got it from Family Guy the first time I heard it. But it's they find the best gems in the weirdest
Yeah.
places. But especially comedy. Comedy's full of like great insights about life. And so,
Yeah, it's true.
whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Right. And it's really just that simple.
Yeah.
So the way you talk about
Yeah.
yourself, the way you think about your capabilities, your potential, and then even the way you look at your weaknesses. Like, am I my weaknesses? Am I useless because I can't do X, Y, Z? Or is that just something I struggle with? But ultimately, I still have a lot to bring to this world. I can still, find a lot of happiness in life. So just the way we talk about ourselves in that capacity, that's one thing that I think of when you ask that question. And that's the human level. That's everybody kind of deals with that. And it's just, I think it's
Hmm.
amplified for people that are coming home that are in prison because they live in a world of dehumanization that is more concentrated than the average person, right? You have guards talking to you a certain way. You have the whole system, the way it's operating, is kind of giving you a message every day of you're worthless. When you get out, you get blocked from opportunities left and right. People look at you sideways if you say you have a record. So those reasons make it more amplified. But it's still the same thing for every human being in the way we carry shame and guilt. But the other part of it is the language we use around the label, right, of having a record. There's a whole conversation around formerly incarcerated person, justice involved, system impacted, ex-con, felon. Which of these are okay, which of these are not okay, and then you get even within that, you get a realm where the ones that are better, some people are like, I still don't like that one, I like this one, and it kind of gets to a point of um, beyond just semantics. It gets into a point where we're actually hurting our ability to make progress in this work and to have other people come in and get involved. Because if I'm talking to somebody, and this happens commonly, if I'm talking to like a conservative, if I'm talking to a business owner, someone who has really no concept of all of this, they've just been
Mm.
selling mutual funds their whole life, and they don't really know crap about what you're supposed to call somebody. But they're interested in trying to do better for folks, starting out from the point of, okay, well, the first thing you want to do is call us the right thing. I don't think that's the first thing I want to have a conversation around, because right, that then creates a point of constant hand slapping, because you're not going to just stop doing that, right? Like, people don't just
Mm.
suddenly, oh, that's the term, okay, I'll call you that
Absolutely.
forever. I have friends that are they
Right.
them, and I consistently still call them she or he, because it's just not something I grew up with, right? So it's hard.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then what happens is I start to feel a little bit of resentment towards them, because I keep having it, I'm doing this wrong, and then like you're having to reprimand me potentially, or I'm reprimanding myself because you're not reprimanding me, but I know in
Yes.
your head you are. So this whole mental conversation and dialogue happens, right? And so the quickest thing that I want you to do is to just see different folks that challenge the way you understand a person as a record, and to see how the
Mm.
system is not helping folks. So that's a whole different conversation. That from there, once I get you to see that, you'll actually more reasonably start to not call us things in a different way, right?
Mm.
So it's, to me, it's a secondary conversation. It's important, but it's also not important. It's also a distraction. Another example I think of is the DOC. The DOC now calls people in Wisconsin persons in our care. And I know when they first started doing that, you know who really hated it? The persons in their care, because they're not
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It's like why are you changing the name of what you call me when the treatment is, if anything, worse since the pandemic, right?
Mm.
And so it just creates this dynamic where now we're chasing, is this the right thing the DOC should be calling them? Um, do they really care about them if you're not? Like, all these things, that it just becomes a point of distraction when the whole decision making and foundation of why things are so terrible is still over here just operating completely without any attention, because we're over here talking about the language. So it just is a very
Mm.
nuanced aspect of, do we focus on this too much? How much do we focus on it? When do we bring it up with new people? It's something that I can't give you an answer as to what to do in those cases. I know how I try to handle it, and it's very situational. But the other
Right.
part about it is that the people who are the least concerned about being called ex-cons and felons and inmates are ex-cons, felons, and inmates. I know when I
Right.
was
Right.
inside, there was this thing when I first got locked up where people were like, "Don't call me an offender, call me a convict," and there was this cultural difference between the two. Convict
Mm.
had like a status of respect and of like integrity and not snitching and all these other old school masculine tropes, and
Mm.
then offender was like just some DOC shit, and it just didn't really matter to individual to be called that, and it was like it just was a much less appealing label. And so now we look at both of them as terrible. I think maybe somebody would say convict is worse than offender nowadays, but it's just this way that I think we are saying what people should call themselves, and I think it also kind of goes into, and I might be rambling a bit here, but this is just a topic that has a lot of interesting points. It kind of
Yeah.
ties in with abolition too. Like, you know who you'll find who are
Mm.
the least likely to be an abolitionist? Someone who spent time in prison, right? It's really, really interesting
Yes.
how folks that are least impacted are oftentimes the most making noise about what somebody should be doing or shouldn't be called than the people that are actually in there. But this is the last point I make about it. That doesn't mean we should just let folks that have been living in dehumanized situations not challenge the way that they talk about themselves, or not challenge the self-concept or the system overall, because they've lived with somebody who they never would want their family to be around, right? Like, I look at that myself a lot when I look at, for example, abolition, and tell people, yeah, even though I live with people who I would never want out of prison, that's not exactly what abolition is saying. It's way more nuanced than that. So there's also this conversation of, let's challenge still people that don't necessarily care about that word, to understand what it might be doing to them, but at the same time, not make so big of a deal that it becomes a distraction and that we're like slapping people's hands left and right. That could be allies or are allies right now.
Mm.
So then how would you approach kind of this other demographic of people that have either never been affected by somebody who's been incarcerated or think they haven't, and bridge that gap to kind of that label and that stigma, because there it seems like certain people in that demographic, as soon as they hear that you're formerly incarcerated or an ex-con, a convict, that automatically is like a conversation stopper, right? So what language can we use to even overcome that?
Right.
Are there softer terms?
I don't really believe in softer terms. I think that when we use softer terms, we we're doing a couple of things. One, we're obviously letting the system off the hook, right? If I call myself justice involved or system impacted, it might help somebody look at me a little softer and maybe continue the conversation. But it also ignores the fact that the system is trash and it should not be let off the hook. Like I'm formerly incarcerated. That label is something that I actually identify with more than anything else, which is very odd. Then I think about that. Somebody asked me one time what my identification or what do I identify as, and I was like, I can't think of one thing I identify as other than formerly incarcerated. Like that colors so much of my life, and so.
Yeah.
But I think that's one that I don't want. I want the conversation to always remain with that at the heart of it. The ugliness should be there because we have to look at that. But at the same time, I think that we assume sometimes that a person can't handle a certain term because some people can't, or because maybe they make a face. But I think there's a way to navigate that. Like, I can't give my examples, right? Because my examples are very specific to me. I have not. I have lived a bit of a charmed life since I've been out. I tell people I'm not a reentry story because I had a very soft landing, right? I had my degree before I got out. Like, I live in a different world than most people do when it comes to coming home. But I've seen people who've come home and made it, and there's a lack of willingness to be small for other people. That's one part. So I know people that'll just say
Uh,
like, "Yep, I was in prison. That's who I am." But bam, immediately, this is what I achieved from that, and this is why you want me around, right? It's almost like you have to pitch yourself more than most people do, which sucks. But there's no arguing with the snowstorm. You just put on a damn coat or you stay inside, right? So like that's the same thing I have when it comes to being formerly incarcerated. Is yeah, it sucks that we have to kind of pitch ourselves and have to like sell ourselves more than maybe most people do. But that is just the reality of how it is. You're not going to find any other successful way around that. That's going to really get you somewhere. And so it's kind of a matter of both going right at it and then immediately pivoting that conversation so people can like continue it and see that, oh, you're not the usual label. Because really what a person's doing when they hear that is they're not really running from the fact that you're formerly incarcerated. They're running from, one, they don't know enough about that, or two, they've been socialized to think they should stay away from you because they hear it. So if you immediately are like, yeah, this is the case, but oh, hold on, don't go anywhere. There's more to this story. Like, explain it a bit more. People are intrigued by that. They see that that's very different. Like, oh, I didn't think of it that way, right? So I think it's more so that than how do we find words and terms that hide the ugliness of it, right? But again, it's also situational. I can't say in every situation what a person should or shouldn't do. If I was in need of money and there was a job that really I needed, and I know if I was very confident they found out, or if I was talking about it a lot, I'd lose the job. I'd shut the hell up, right? Like, so it's very much situational. I just say as a general rule for the way most people live, you are going to benefit yourself over time more and more if you just find a way to own it and talk about it rather than trying to hide it.
yeah, I love that. That's perfect. And it sounds like the most important step anyone can take is that first step of self-talk, of yeah, that internal dialogue. And then we can build that confidence to address others and like you said, move on to the more important topics, right? We're talking about the work that we're doing and the change that's been made. And I feel like there's like a generational kind of systemic almost language barrier that's just been passed down over generations, over years, and to expect, an institution to change a label or a name for someone immediately and then everything's better is unrealistic, right? There's much more work that needs to be done below the surface. And just changing the name of something doesn't change it itself until there's more work being done underneath there. So how can or what is the impact of these generational stigma and incarceration and thoughts and everything like how does this affect society in general and how can society get behind this change? You know?
Well, society is impacted by any any issue it's not acknowledging um, in various ways. And so you have the people like you look at the center of a city is going to be where you find the most impact of something like incarceration, right? People going to prison and jail back and forth or for a long period of time. The impact of high security and law enforcement in certain areas, the resentment and the hate and the violence that then creates in this vicious cycle. So there's that very obvious element that happens. And then you get further away from the city and people like try to move away from it and they think, okay, I want to just be able to raise my family or exist and not have less chance of my car being broken into or less chance of getting robbed or shot or reckless driving accident, right? So it's a very, very accurate statement. You're going to have a less of a chance of experiencing that further you get away from the inner city. But there's an element to it that I kind of look at it the same way that I have with my son. I say this. I've not been as confident saying it for a while, but I've gotten a lot better at it. Just because, for one, it's reality and people need to hear it. And there's no way that I'm the only one that thinks this. My son is not the most important thing in my world. My work is, because I believe that my son will enter a world that is going to be not great for him if the world is not better. And so there's this duality of it. My son is somebody, just like my work, that is incredibly important to me. But the work is something that I feel my specific value in this life is to lean into heavily and try and significantly make changes that will benefit him long term. It doesn't mean I'm neglecting my son. I think anyone that knows me knows I'm not neglecting my son. But if I had the balance of the two, there are people that can take care of my son. There are things that I do in this work that I don't see getting done as well if I'm not fully there. And so,
Mm.
disagree with that as one person may, that is how I like view my lane. And so what I'm saying about that is that people that live far outside of the city, they don't understand that that problem's not going anywhere, right? Your kids are still going to grow up. Your kids are going to live in the city probably. They might go to school in the city. They might go travel in the city. And then your kids, who you spent 20 years to carefully grow and nurture in this nice suburban neighborhood, die at the age of 22 because of something they did in the city. It's all connected, right? Or sometimes the Waukesha experience, it literally drives into your community. So you have to have a greater concept that these things exist and they have to all be addressed and looked at. Just because I don't see them every day doesn't mean they're not happening or not going to have some impact on me. And so, I mean, that's really the more that we can zoom out from our lives and the more that we can expand our understanding of family, that is how this gets solved. Right? I've had people consistently ask me questions like, okay, well, we know what doesn't work. What does work? I'm like, well, you know what works. You do it in your family. Right? Like if your son gets in
Mhm.
trouble, you don't disown them forever. If your daughter gets locked up, I guarantee you'd go visit them. Right? So like that same view you have towards your family when they mess up or when they frustrate you, you have to have that same concept towards humanity in general. Otherwise, things fester, and you have evil villains all around just kind of being created that are going to one day try and take over the world, like in every Avenger movie. So that's kind of the way I view
Absolutely.
that. Ultimately, is this larger thing that's very obvious to us when we zoom out. It's only because we're only focused on our circle that we're not seeing the impact of it, and then we're just shocked one day when it comes into our lives.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I can say you are certainly not alone in thinking that. I mean, I've had several conversations recently about this belief that I hold where, like you, I'm kind of like, am I the only one that thinks this? But I believe deeply that my children cannot thrive if my neighbor is starving. My children, I love them. I don't neglect them. I'm there for them, but they can skip lunch so my neighbor can eat. They will be okay. You know, if my neighbor is thriving, my children will thrive long term. It might stink for that 20 minutes, but after that, their whole life will be better. So you are not alone in thinking that.
No. And it seems like we're attempting to expand this sense of family, this sense of community to those that normally we wouldn't include in there. Reaching out to those that are affected when we're doing okay. So expanding that sense of community and sense of support and raising the perceived value level of everyone around us through our language, through how we speak to others and how we speak to ourselves. Is that kind of where we're going with this?
Yeah, I would agree with the caveat that at the same time as we're expanding, I think a lot of fracturing and separation is also happening. It's
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a much bigger conversation. I don't even know if I have
Mm.
the information to cogently comment on it, but I see, like you guys see when you talk about the youth and you look at the youth work that's going on, and I talk to my friends that are in that space deeply, and they'll say things like these kids nowadays, which part of that is like fogeyism maybe. Like I think every generation has said these kids nowadays, but
Yeah.
there's a very
Yeah.
different element to what you're seeing with youth nowadays and the
Yeah.
disassociation with certain concepts, and the almost willingness or I guess hopelessness to just float through the days with no plan seems to be a bit
Mm.
more in existence than it has been in the past, and that goes to a bunch of different things. So that's also happening while there is more coming together and zooming out.
Yeah, you're gonna snap some people out of their comfort zone, you know. It might not feel right at first to change how you think or how you've been told to think, you know, how you were raised to think or to speak. So challenging those thoughts and challenging those ideas, I feel is important. Sounds like that's what you're doing, like in your work with the community, you know. And at Peaceful Prisons Project, we're trying to expand this sense of inclusion and value, and trying to just raise awareness about the issue, you know, because if somebody doesn't know about it, how can they work on it, right?
Yep, true.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to ask you, I don't know what, as far as breaking cycles, like language cycles and thinking cycles, have you found any sort of like tools or exercises that can expedite the process or make it easier for someone who's never been down that road before?
Yeah, I would say two. Two of them have been things that I used early on, and I still do. Um, Maybe three. In the morning, I don't do this as much now. It's kind of a bit of a default for me, fortunately, but sometimes I do need to still do it. Starting the day off with like gratitude meditation, a gratitude journaling, gratitude in some component where you like start out the day level setting that a bunch of stupid shit might happen today, and
Mhm.
that doesn't define me or the day, right? Like that's not going to make my day, that's not going to control my mood, or at least I'm going to really try to not have that be the case, and setting a right now platform of gratitude for all the things, reminding myself of all the things that are great in my life is going to really help when all these things come at me throughout the day. So that's one thing that
Yeah.
always helps. I think something that a friend of mine calls opposite action, which is when something happens and you feel like doing one thing, you like almost force yourself to do the other. So I know when I was incarcerated, what I would do is if somebody stole something from me or say didn't pay me back for something, I had to give it up or whatever it might be that I felt I was being wronged, and at a different point in my life I would have responded in a very different way. I would like go give somebody else something, or just like
Yeah.
maybe go to that person and say, "Hey man, I forgive you," even though they didn't ask for it. They might even be confused, but it's like forcibly having my ego have to exist inside me doing the opposite of what it wants me to do. And I think the third one would be kind of having the mantras. Like I genuinely use free people problems consistently, and I say to myself like I'm not standing for count at least. Like so that'll bring me back to reality very quickly a lot of times when I'm in a mode. I think some people this might be a different version of it, where for some people are like stop crying, like what they said themselves. So that's like my version of stop crying, stop being a baby.
Yeah.
But it's just it kind of reminds me and brings me back to that this is exactly the stuff that I wanted to do and deal with when I was inside, and I can't complain about it now that I have. Like these are the problems I wanted, right? So those little things, the level setting with the gratitude in the morning, the mantra, whatever that would be for you, and the opposite action are the three things that I think are really solid tools to kind of start on that path.
Excellent. I feel like a lot of people could learn from that, you know, use it. Um, and was there any point at which, was there any like turning point for you, any moment specifically, or was it over a period of time where you had this realization that there needed to be some kind of change, there needed to be an improvement in my self-talk and how I you know affect my community? Did that happen to you at any point?
Yeah, it was gradual. I
Right.
both laugh at and envy people that probably more in movies. I don't know if this is actually a real thing, but they'll say like the moment my change happened was this
Yeah.
date and time. Like I have no idea when that
Right.
like for me were. It's just been gradual of experiences. I know key experiences, key themes that happened early on in my incarceration. Buddhism was a really big one. I, I think reading certain biographies of people were really key. About a handful, like Malcolm X's is one, Eldridge Cleaver's is one, Mark Twain's biography was one. In different ways, this how this occurs. So there are just things that have happened that I know were definitely points of strength in that process, in that turnaround. But yeah, I don't know like an actual time. I know it was very early on in my incarceration. That's another one I could say. Like when you get 17 years in prison and you have no reason that you ended up in prison, that kind of makes you really look at like what happened here, and just facing
Hmm.
down the difficult to accept things about yourself, the mistakes you made, and then like how do you design your life so those are less likely to ever happen again.
Right. Not
When
trying to go ahead.
oh, when you say you have had no reason to be in prison, what does that mean?
So I didn't come. I have no ACEs, right? Like that's one of the most common denominators of people that you'll find in prison is that they have had some adverse childhood experiences. Usually pretty high up on that list of 10 things that people check off for that. I don't have one of them, and so that alone doesn't make any sense why I ended up in prison. Two, I have pretty high intelligence, which actually that would, in an interesting way, that actually could mean I would go to prison. Just probably feds. And then I had a, a whole life of in my family that were loving supporting family. Everyone in my family pretty much either had or was getting a college degree. I just finished my freshman year on the dean's list at UWM, so none of it makes any sense why I ended up in prison.
Hmm. But it happens, and that's important to remember is that it happens to anyone. It does, uh, ending up in a system, ending up in a jail, a prison, an institution, can happen to anyone, regardless of your background, your upbringing, who you are at that time. Um, and it's unfortunate because over time in those systems you start developing these new habits and these new ways of thinking that could lead to further criminal behavior or expanding the negative thinking. um, and and I feel like that self-talk is that first step of successful reentry. You know, is there anything like, I mean, you did touch on the three things you like to get into, your freedom, your gratitude, opposite action, and a mantra. Um, I feel like that's a great step for anyone, trying to successfully re-enter. Is there anything, that a family member or someone in the community could do to help someone who's going through these times, these issues?
Yeah. Uh, so one thing I'm gonna also say is like a question that was in there, but it wasn't really a question. I'm like creating my own
Mm.
question out of your question. Is
Yeah,
when it
yeah,
comes to prison things, like it really comes down to that. Some of these
yeah.
concepts of how we're supposed to do in life are super simple, and that's when you come home. The people you're around, the places you go to, and the things you do
Mhm.
is ultimately, are you doing things that are going to more likely lead on this path or the other one, right? It's all very simple. It's just a matter
Yeah.
of do we want to do it or not. And for people coming that are around, it's an area that we've been talking about recently of trying to put together some toolkit maybe for a loved one who either is in a direct support role for a person coming home or has just met somebody coming home they want to help, right? And it's kind of different. So if you're a person that has just met somebody or you're like a service provider, the things that you can do are make connections, just kind of hear people out, just kind of be there as much as you have the capacity to. Those are fairly simple and basic because there's an apparatus and an infrastructure that does exist for reentry in Milwaukee. I would say a lot of big cities do. People don't really know about it.
Mhm.
There's a thing that gets thrown around all the time by people that are not connected with this issue or that are inside that there's no support for people. And even when I was in, that's kind of why we started the newsletter. Was I'm in here and I know there's a lot of stuff that happens and exists. So when I get out, I'm pretty sure I'll find more. So there's a whole lot of support. It's just a matter of how there's just different issues with it other than they exist. So they really do exist. So there's that component for people that are more so trying to help as a non-direct support element in someone's life. If you're the direct support element, if you're family, if you're the wife, girlfriend, father, mother, sister, brother, whatever it might be, close friend, you especially in a relationship situation, and this is what our third season of correcting the narrative videos is all around. We're trying to find one more video to finish it up, but there's this lack of understanding of the person coming home. I think their capacity, right? We hear about a lot of institutionalization and jail mentality. We hear about how and expect people to come home and need to kind of take things slow, and they're not going to know technology. They're not going to know how to drive a car. But there's this element of I think needing to exist as a free person that is kind of lost, I think. And we expect because a person has gray hair and a beard and is 6'3" that they're not going to act like a child in certain ways. But you got to get over that. Like, I mean, I to this moment, I am right now, as I said to my friend Adam, Adam's been up 5 years. I've been up 3.5. Adam's 20 and I'm 23 when it comes to like dealing with interpersonal and especially relationship aspects. Whereas
Right.
well, he's over 40 and I'm 40, and so it's a situation where there's a stunted growth in certain capacities, and you just have to be very highly attuned to see where those might be for somebody, and also help them
Yeah.
understand that it's completely okay that they don't have, some of those things, but it's not okay to just accept it. Right? I think a lot of
Mhm.
people that are formerly incarcerated, they say things like, "Oh, I don't know tech. I just got out of prison." Like you got out of prison 3 years ago. There's no excuse that you don't know how to send me an email by now, right? That shit passed a
Yeah.
long time ago. So let's stop
Yeah.
accepting that limitation, right? You can learn this skill. It's not difficult. So just kind of how do we challenge the folks that are coming home to always say, "Yep, this is where you are, and that's okay, but it's not okay to just accept that about yourself." So we are going to
Right.
always grow and try and develop and get you back to a status that is more in line with what it takes to be a free person, right? Because you can't have the same mentality you had with a lot of things in prison that you have out here. Some things you actually can, but
Mm.
yeah, I think that would be the main thing is just really being aware for yourself and helping the other person be aware where they need to grow, where things are not acceptable, but that it's not going to be fast, and that you're going to be confused sometimes by very very grown people in very childish behavior.
Right. And it's difficult, and it's a sad fact that a lot of people when they get out, they're overwhelmed by all these areas that they feel deficient in, that they feel like they missed out on or they're behind in. So that's where that support comes in, right? Like, look, we're in this together. We understand where you are now, and that's okay. But these are the areas we're going to work on together. These are the areas where I can help you or teach you this to learn, or I can guide you through learning something new and improving your life in any way, right?
Yeah,
So
the,
so
the
that
two
support
things
system is
that
incredibly important.
the two things that I think are the most key I've seen for people that make it is one, not having a love of money. Right? If you can come out and not be
Mm,
guided by I have to get this money, I have to get the bag. Like if that is not a mentality you have, you already are helping
yeah,
yourself out considerably. The second one is
yeah,
I'm not going to try and make up for lost time. I'm just gonna slowly work my way back into this, right? And so those
yeah.
two features, when I see them with people, those folks have been the most successful that I've found.
Hmm.
And that sounds great in theory and in practice, but it also seems challenging when you have maybe a whole group of people on kind of the opposite side of transformative justice, reformative justice, that are saying, well, you were gone and now you have to make it up to me or make it up to your community. Like you can sometimes hear actively and aggressively people saying that and saying like, well, if you don't have money, you don't have worth. If, you owe me because I raised your kids while you were incarcerated, or XYZ.
Yeah. No, you're right. 100% right. I mean, I have no answer for that because that's the case. Like it's both a scenario where that's why the question was what would I say to people, and that's kind of what I want more folks to know. There's these loved one groups on Facebook. There are these activists and protesting and kind of you know efforts to help in different prisons in different scenarios, and these people that have somebody coming home soon, they just need to understand like what are your expectations of this person, right? Because your
Yeah.
expectations cannot be a quid pro quo. It can't be like handing off duties. Like this doesn't stop. This whole support doesn't stop when they come home. Like you're not getting, you're not getting like this individual ready to kind of do a lot of things, right? It might even in a lot of cases, it's worse when a person comes home than it was when they were inside, especially in relationships. So you got to
Yeah.
be fully aware what you're signing up for and what you're getting involved in, and it can work,
Hmm.
but you have to have correct expectations.
Right. And seek that support, get that help where you can, in communities, support systems, groups, wherever you can talk about the issues and relate to someone, to be able to share that experience with someone. I feel like it alleviates the pressure and the weight of, this hurdle to climb over, this mountain to climb of reentry, you know. Um, yeah. Is
Do you have any thoughts like on how maybe like media or Hollywood is kind of projecting this image of either formerly incarcerated people are super, badass and they're so attractive, or they're deadbeats that you should never talk to. And we see it all the time in movies, right? And we hear terms like, well, he did the crime, now he's got to do the time, or he should be locked away for life. And all of that is just inundating both sides, right? It's both inundating the people that were formerly incarcerated and then this group of people that think that they have never been affected by the system.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how that plays in?
No, I mean, it's a huge component of it. Sometime there was a question somebody asked a group of us once, like 2 years ago, and they said, if you had $1 billion, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do with it? And people talk about traveling or going to the moon, or I forget what all the answers were. And mine was I would just take over the media completely. Because I feel like all of us are just puppets at the end of the day, whether we know it or not in some capacity. Like I find myself consistently affected by tropes and socialization and stereotypes that have just been taught to me and pushed upon me my whole life in America. And then we always hear this too. I always am amused as hell when I hear people say something like they're defending something they're doing as an adult because they were raised that way. I'm like, that is not a defense for doing something. That is never a reason why you
No.
as an adult can continue to say this is why I do it. That is a reason you can give for why you do it. Now let's move past that and do something else. And that's all tied into the way we're socialized, the way culture and the way government, essentially, in a lot of ways, wants to incentivize certain things. It's all tied in. It's really complex. But I mean, the simple answer is 100% matters. It's super important, and the way that we address that is there's no simple, easy way to do it other than to continue trying to create our own media, create our own stories, connect with allies and access points in larger media entities and like people that have a lot of followers, and then try to get those stories out. That's the only way you counterbalance that is if you create a way for folks to see more voices that challenge the way that they have been seeing this group or this demographic represented over and over again. And that's exactly what the crux of everything that I do is trying to get in that narrative space and trying to have more and more outreach to different communities and to ourselves, right? Because I say this commonly that I'm actually more concerned with the way we see ourselves and the way that other people see us. Because if I can get 6 people to see themselves differently, they can change the minds of hundreds, right? But it's harder for me to reach those hundreds by myself. So
Mm.
that part of it is a hugely at play of how we address and talk about things in the media and the way we let things be spoken about as well.
Right. So just being aware and being cognizant of how we speak, and how we portray ourselves, right? Um, Not trying to further this stigma that mainstream media is putting out there, um, that we're this or that. So yeah, very important work. I appreciate this conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
Go Lakers!
Yep. Hey, maybe next season. Maybe Uh, well, thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Abby, for this conversation. I'm glad we got into it because words and labels and language and how we refer to ourselves and others can impact not just us, but people listening to us from the outside. People like our children looking up to us. So this is all important work that needs to continue to be done. We need more of this. So thank you once again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much, Shan.
Thank you.
All right.